Warcry. Lysalgia, the kingdom gilded in golden spires and frosted in ivory, shared the sins of most other empires founded in bloodshed. At the outer edges of the kingdom, only a few miles away from the border walls, rested a patchwork settlement of homes, schools, and amenities. These were the settlements first built as solid garrisons during the battles along the coastline against the ravenous Lamora. Those garrisons were now known as the ghettos of the lower Lysalgian shelf. They had long been neglected as the kingdom stretched farther towards the sea and the thoughts of conquest beyond the waves. It seemed as if the royal family and their guards moved towards the ocean, forgetting the families of their soldiers and battle-weary innocents. Those people, beaten into the ground by generations of poverty and prideful indoctrination, had been abused by the habit of the kingdom to place their priorities elsewhere. Their palaces, chapels, and cathedrals of the cliffs and the border wall that housed their army and artillery towered over them, casting a long shadow. Along the rooftops of a series of buildings, a few miles from the wall, a group of kids sat talking, watching the sunrise and the night clouds gently fading away as they cradled the sun into the morning sky. Their eyes held scenes of glorious sun rays rolling over the kiln-scorched roof tiles, halfway hidden under thatchings of straw and grass. A small boy, about 10 years old, stood valiantly over the shadowy streets. He watched with clenched fists as the sun fell gloriously over a wall of soldiers marching to the palace. Their thunderous steps struck worn cobblestone roads, rattling loose rocks from their muddied beds, along with the families who lived along the path of their march. Freshly cleaned and polished armor caught glare, and each soldier looked like a shining star, fitted in a regal constellation. Their battle flags, different by the regiment, flew in billowing arcs. At the head of the formation flew the flag of their captain, Killian. Its fabrics were sewn thickly and wore his standard-bearer to the brink of exhaustion. Its golden weave stole the powerful early morning light and fluttered brightly like a vigorous firebird. Killian allowed his standard to be paraded in front of him as he watched it, assuring that it was carried with pride and vigor. His eyes bore holes into the bearer's armor. His voice called out to him, ordering him to let out a mighty yell to rile the army. His wavering cry gathered force as he remembered he was on display. Killian noted his charged spirit, delaying his ire for the next infraction. He raised his hand, blindly calling his second-in-command to his side. She silently rushed along, pulling herself magnetically to the shadow of his stride. Her armor, covered in ragged drapes and old coppered bells, heralded her arrival and let Killian know that she saw his summons. When the bells stopped, he smirked, opening his mouth to speak. "This was your home, was it not?" he inquired with assurance. His hand waved out, gesturing to the surrounding homes. Yes, sir. I'm from the western quarter, more specifically. Her voice was low, almost hoarse, but sure. Killian motioned with the same hand, shaking off some portion of her statement with his physical dismissal. I would have thought it all the same. He joked with no laughter. The second in command, Shopu, silently sighed, tempering herself with a brutal sort of restraint. She was used to higher Lysalgians' views of her communities. This injury of honor was one worn deeply into her flesh already. Her bold eyes bore into the side of his head, her menacing nature almost alerting him to his infraction. She spoke, if only but to keep him from facing her, seeing her scornful eyes. I don't believe my neighborhood's to be any different from others. I thought the bright spires and streets of the upper region were just as repetitive as you see my streets of worn stone, she neutrally concluded. Killian shrugged, laughing, and again finding a way to dismiss her statement. I can see how the splendor of the palace could be overwhelming up close. Shopu was content to move on from the conversation, drifting her thoughts over to the matter of focus for the day. Have you a plan yet against these invaders? It's simple, he began in a hubristic tone. We'll be called to battle, to decimate the forces of the enemy, and we will do our jobs exceedingly well. Shopu sighed and let her mind wander. She knew that he was oversimplifying the situation, portraying the war to come as a matter of terrestrial siege, and their chances as being the same as any other battle their nation had participated in. Shopu had heard the rumors, and even if those rumors had been gracious embellishments, they were still more than anything just as simple as meeting them at the fields and doing combat. As we have always, she replied with a monotone timbre. Killian raised his nose and looked back over his shoulders with a glare that said her blind compliance was all that he was ever interested in. They exchanged a look which faded from both of their faces as soon as they were no longer the focus of the other. Shopu returned to her position in the procession. Her own banner, a deep black with a beautiful blue stripe across its first third, flew lightly with its tattered edges resembling the hairs of a wild beast. Her bannerman allowed the colors to rest over his shoulder, his armor with a convenient notch for holding the staff. He softly laughed. He knew that his section leader was now peeved. What's the word? He asked jokingly. Shopu looked to her side, catching his glance and sharing a silent moment of comedic comfort. We just have to hope that the wardens are as powerful as they say they are. Her statement let the air out of her jovial mood. If not, it won't matter what side of town we all come from, Maki. He spoke up to her. The wardens. He was thoroughly confused. Most of the army had not been told about the spiritual wardens and their show of power at the churches the week before. Her voice called to him, educating him gently. They're like spirits that come from the world, just like if the seasons could just get up and walk around. Maki gazed into space, picturing what he believed an avatar of winter would be like. Snow and darkness wandering across the earth, or even into his favorite tavern to have a drink. He shook the thought away, not being able to picture it in a way that made sense. Killian let out a cry, signaling to the advance guard that they were now crossing out of the poorer parts of town and into more respectable neighborhoods. The army let loose a booming battle cry that shook the streets and cleared civilians from the market and left their march unimpeded. As the commotion died down, Shopu continued her conversation, taking the reins of her subordinate's limited imagination. She crafted images with her hands, sculpting shapes of what she pictured when she thought of the wardens. Maki was captivated by her explanation. His eyes widened and his mouth drooped in awe. And they're supposed to be helping us. He seemed very excited, thrilled by the prospect of working alongside powerful beings. I haven't been this excited in a while, Lieutenant. He raised the flag high, letting out an excited battle cry that triggered the rest of the army to reciprocate. Killian glared at Shoku's battalion over his shoulder. His eyebrows were raised and his nose turned up. Other officers were within their right to rile the ranks to a war cry. He might have been subtly offended that the young man's cry was, perhaps, a bit more vibrant than what he was used to. Shoku caught her commander's eye and spawned a toothy grin. Her lunatic cackling twisted into a violent cry that her battalion recognized as a bloodthirsty call to battle. They howled and contorted their army's calls into their own vicious roar. The rest of the army silently paused, pressured and intimidated, as the howls of their companions rattled in their ears. As they had only just passed out of the lower shelf, their cries echoed into the homes of their families and admirers. They reciprocated the battle cries, being heard by all of the lower and middle shelves, as large swaths of the lower shelf spontaneously burst into bouts of martial song and yells. Shoku's teeth twisted further into a sharp grin as she watched her senior's body cringe as he contorted in his armor. Maybe now he'd be able to remember where he was, if he was ever in the neighborhood again.